The Horizon franchise really can't seem to catch a break. How about it? Zero Dawn proved itself as a groundbreaking new IP for Sony back in 2017, but much of the critical reception was soon drowned out by thunderous applause celebrating the apparent crowning achievement that was Breath of the Wild. Despite enjoying the latest iteration on the Zelda formula, Zero Dawn stood out to me in a much grander way. Many eagerly anticipated its sequel, and now, 5 years later, history is sadly repeating itself. Just like with Zero Dawn, 1 week after Forbidden West's release, a new monumental entry in the Soulsborne franchise, Elden Ring, dropped, and overtook much of the discussion within the gaming community. A few hallowed cries on Twitter called for people to not forget about Aloy, but alas, the damage was done, as Elden Ring stole the conversation away from this excellent sequel. And now, that's not to take away anything from Elden Ring, it's a phenomenal game in a way much different than Forbidden West. However, Forbidden West is owed its dues, both the praises and the punches, and that's what we will accomplish in this video. Forbidden West had massive shoes to fill, as Zero Dawn felt like a game that got so many things right on the first attempt. To create a worthy sequel, Forbidden West needed to not only expand on the existing systems from that previous game, but also address some of the complaints, such as the mindless yet restrictive climbing, the sometimes empty feeling of the open world, and the animatronic feel of most conversations. But more than anything else, Forbidden West needed to avoid losing what made the original so praiseworthy, whether it be the exhilarating combat, the impressive world building, or the memorable characters. And for the most part, the team at Guerrilla Games exceeded in their endeavors, as we will come to see. It's not without its shortcomings, but I can assure you that this title should not be overshadowed. So with that, welcome to my critique of Horizon Forbidden West. When examining any open world game, one of my favorite things to do is take stock of the atmosphere the developers have created, both in terms of the physical land and the cultures that inhabit it. Zero Dawn succeeded in establishing a believable open world with many peaks, valleys, and biomes to explore, but it stumbled in helping us to understand the people that called it home. So, how does Forbidden West fare on this front? Well, much, much better. Starting with the lay of the land, Forbidden West provides a rich, dense, and highly detailed world to explore, one that strikes a balance between ease of navigation and geographical realism. The game takes place in a future version of the west coast of the United States, with many obvious landmarks, such as the Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, the Rocky Mountains, the Cascade Mountains, Redwood National Park, and the San Francisco Bay. It's fascinating to make these discoveries in real time, as the game only mentions a few of them outright. It helps provide merit to the believability of this world because we're easily able to compare it to the locations of their real-world counterparts. And what a brilliant stretch of land to base your game on, considering all the various biomes that are found there. The team at Guerrilla did a wonderful job at taking these landscapes and translating them into video game form, while promoting a lot of diversity within the lay of the land. Expect to find deserts, rocky lowlands, open plains, snowy mountainsides, thick jungles, kelp reefs, and sandy beaches. In Zero Dawn, some of the transitionary lands between these biomes felt very harsh and rushed, as jungles gave way to desert lands in abrupt ways. That isn't the case here in Forbidden West, as moving between different terrains feels a lot more natural, lending the world more believability. It's not perfect, but it's a step up. This sense of flow allows the player to sink into this world more easily, but its sheer size makes fast travel a necessity in most cases. However, for those who avoid that Siren's lore, a sizable and brilliant tour of the western states is in store for you. Many of the game's less notable activities are also embedded perfectly into the landscape, such as the relic ruins and vista points. This ensures they don't stick out like sore thumbs, while also providing another activity to complete at your leisure when stumbling upon them. Zero Dawn was criticized for having a beautiful but empty-feeling world, and it's elements like these that help Forbidden West avoid having that same fate. Of course, there's more to this world than just the beautiful, naturally occurring landscapes, as the towns and cities have also been constructed to reflect the people that inhabit them. Chainscrape is an Oseram settlement filled with hardworking but thirsty people. Therefore, the massive bar in the center of town feels like a natural fit. The indigenous people of Plainsong are one with nature, so it's no surprise to see their city constructed within a massive tree-like structure that feels inspired and unique. And the different capitals of the three Tenakth clans each reflect that group's attitudes toward their tribe as a whole. For example, the Bulwark is a seemingly impenetrable wall of stony mountainside mirroring the clan's preference to keep to themselves. Each of these civilizations is different from one another, each providing their own sets of landmarks and quest lines, making them memorable in their own right. All of these environments, both natural and man-made, are rich with detail and come together to form a cohesive but varied world for you to explore. It's by no means the most enjoyable open world to traverse or explore, but sheerly in terms of geographical world design, it's a notable step up from Zero Dawn, in size, scope, and detail. Of course, that's only half of the equation. If the landscape of Forbidden West is great, its attention to detail in presenting the cultures of this world is superb. Zero Dawn introduced us to a few different tribes, including the Nora, the Karja, the Banuk, and the Oseram. And while each of them played a part in the story, much of their cultural differences weren't discussed in enough detail to establish clear identities, at least not to me. Since this world is completely new to us, the onus was on the game to go a little further in setting the world up, and it's my belief that Zero Dawn stumbled in its execution of this. But that isn't the case in Forbidden West. We see 6 distinct cultures throughout this game, including the return of the Oseram and the Karja, alongside of new ones, such as the Utaru, the Tenakth, the Quen, and the Zeniths. In the first portion of the open world, you'll deal with the Oseram and Karja, who are at each other's throats over the future of Chainscrape, a town located in the Daunt. The town is made up of mostly Oseram workers, but it's technically on Karja land. The self-appointed boss of the town, Olvund, is a corrupt overseer who seeks ways to get the Karja to give up the rights to their land, making him much more powerful and wealthy in the process. The whole town is on a work stoppage due to a herd of dangerous machines stumbling into the lands unexpectedly. Olvund blames their appearance on the Karja and uses it as leverage to try earning the deed to this land. You'll pick up this bit of information even through completing just the main story missions alone, but diving into any of the side content will shed more light on it. A quest in the northern part of this region sees you rescuing some trapped miners who comment on Olvund's incessant pushing of them to work more despite the obvious risks. It's this sort of dialogue that makes this entire region feel cohesive. You are the outsider here, but everyone else here is aware of the society's struggles and issues. You can elect to follow a series of side quests that ultimately proves Olvund's guilt. He was the one who set the Bristlebacks free in the Daunt, and thanks to your efforts, he's forced out of the region. This allows a friend of Aloy's to take control of the town, promising better conditions for its inhabitants and workers, while also establishing a better working relationship with the Karja. The overall issue of this region is introduced in the main quest, but the details of the struggle are elaborated on more if you choose to engage with the side content. It makes both story missions and side quests blend together perfectly to further enhance the believability of the world. And oh yeah, this is just the first area of the game. This same level of attention to detail is carried on throughout the remainder of the tribes, allowing you to have a clear picture of what each of them stands for by the time the credits roll. The best of the new bunch are the Utaru and the Tenakth, which are brought up long before you even meet them. In particular, you'll hear about the savagery of the Tenakth and how they're a vicious set of people who have constantly been at war with the Karja. You'll hear all of these negative things about this group of people, but then you meet them and you begin to understand their culture in greater detail, and you come to realize that what you heard wasn't completely true. There's bad blood between the Karja and the Tenakth historically, but it's only because the former invaded the lands of the latter in a brutal attempt to overthrow the tribe during the Red Raids. You only heard so much shit talking about the Tenakth because it's only natural for the Karja to look down on this group of people given their prior engagements. With time, you come to understand the Tenakth for who they truly are, not just what you heard about them. It allows you to draw your own conclusions about each side. It's a good lesson for thinking about how we treat and view different cultures in our real world, while also providing this universe more credibility. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. You'll first meet the Utaru, a group of people who view themselves as just another component of the naturally occurring cycle. They view Mother Nature's will as supremely accurate and don't question the natural cycle, even if it's causing their community great distress. The Utaru have this amazing ritual where each member carries a seed pouch on them, and upon their death, the seeds are planted to represent that person becoming one with nature once more. It's a beautiful tradition, and it pops up in every main and side quest involving the death of an Utaru. Mentioning it every time is evidence of the extreme attention to detail when portraying the people of this world, and I love that. Aloy encounters the Utaru relatively early on and bears witness to their dying farmlands, but the people in charge seem unwilling to seek a solution, claiming that when their time is up, their time is simply up. Aloy, and by extension the player, bring an interesting perspective to all of this, as her insights into the old world allows her to fully comprehend what is actually happening. The world is dying because Gaia isn't active to maintain it, and only through rebooting her can Earth be saved. We know this as a player, but the everyday people of this world are left to their own interpretations to make sense of the planet's conditions. We can't hope to change an entire culture, even if they are operating without all the information. We can only hope to save the planet and understand its inhabitants on their terms. It's a wonderful set of perspectives that plays off each other very well. It establishes the people of this world while still allowing the player to form their own conclusions. The Tenakth are the game's most expansive tribe though, and the one you'll spend the most amount of time with if you do everything in the game. They function as a single tribe, but are split into 3 different factions: Sky, Desert, and Lowlands. We learn that for years, these clans fought against one another for supremacy until one Lowlands chieftain named Hakaro was able to capture the Sacred Grove, establish dominance, and work on creating peace between the clans. He was inspired by an old world message to abandon the bloodshed in favor of peace. In fact, the entire Tenakth mindset stems from the understanding of a group called the Ten, a group of ancestral humans who fought against the corrupted machines to buy Elizabeth more time to complete the Zero Dawn mission. Strength is all that matters to the Tenakth, and they mark their victories directly on their bodies using painted symbols. Each clan carries on this tradition despite choosing to live in very different biomes across the game world. Through interacting with each, we're better able to understand each clan individually as well as the group as a whole. Of course, there's one other faction of Tenak's soldiers who have split away from these three clans to start an uprising against Hakaru. This group of rebels feels betrayed by Hakaru's attempts at peace with the Karja, the longtime aggressor of their people. This group, led by Guerilla, plays an important role in the story, but for our purposes here, it helps establish the credibility of the game's history. An entire world has been thought up of here, including a past that we weren't around for. And learning about it through dialogue options and thoughtful quest lines allows the player to immerse themselves into this world wholeheartedly. The only culture that struggles to establish itself is that of the Quen, a late-game tribe who comes from overseas. They seek old-world knowledge for their contemporary problems. All we really know about them is much of their data access is restricted by those at the top, as to not expose the clan to any information that may run counterintuitive to their belief system. It has scary parallels to our real world, but it isn't developed enough in this game to be as impactful as the Tenakth or the Utaru. I look for them to expand on this group further in the next game. Regardless, let the length of this section speak volumes about the quality of this game's attention to detail when it comes to world building. Guerilla succeeded in furthering our understanding of tribes from the previous game, while also doing an immaculate job at introducing and developing new tribes. Not only do we come to understand each tribe's customs and beliefs, but the fragile relationship between them is developed in detail. Overall, it's one of the most well-crafted worlds I've experienced in a long time. Alright, now that we know Guerilla has constructed a prominent, coherent, and vast world, we can shift our attention to how we traverse it and what there is to do. This section of the video will focus purely on player-driven exploration, not necessarily the quests and checklist side content the game offers in droves. Zero Dawn was criticized for having a big open world with very few things to uncover that weren't quest-related, and Forbidden West looks to rectify that. Littered throughout the map are question marks that the player can venture to. Often these lead to collectibles, loot, and miniature levels to explore. In the first section of the map, this works out well, as most of the question marks are accessible through climbing alone, meaning their tasks can be completed at any time. However, as you expand further west, you'll come to find that many question marks aren't able to be completed until you progress further in the main story. There's almost a Metroidvania-like element to this game in this sense. In the early hours of my 50-hour playthrough, I found myself wanting to explore because the world was so rich in design, but often it led to disappointment. That's because I hadn't advanced the main story enough to gain access to the tools required to complete these question mark locations. I spent a whole hour running around the map, exploring question marks, only to be let down time after time, because I just didn't have a way to destroy Firegleam yet, or these robotic vines that were blocking the way. It felt like a needless constraint since these items don't play some major part in the world's lore or the story being told. By the time I got the tools, I had no desire to go back to these locations, and that was a shame. Ironically, the game would have been better served by giving all of these tools to the player up front, much like Breath of the Wild, so that the player could engage with content at their own pace. But if the team disagreed with that approach, a much simpler solution would have been making question marks appear red when you don't have the tool to complete it. This would have saved the player time since they don't have to make the journey just to realize they can't complete the task. Of course, journeying can be fun in its own right if traversal is handled well. I've spoke on this before, but many games of the past 5 years or so have emphasized their means of traversal, making the simple act of movement just as enjoyable as engaging with the game's other main systems, like combats, etc. Forbidden West attempts to catch up in some regards, but ultimately fails to do so when compared to games like Spider-Man Miles Morales or The Pathless. Real quick, walking and running is your standard affair. There's no point in wasting time there. The same goes for machine mounts that make a return. However, Forbidden West also reinvents its climbing system from Zero Dawn while also introducing swimming and flying mechanics into the player's arsenal. Starting with the climbing, and the team has made a real effort to revamp this system. The comparisons between Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild may have forced their hand in this regard, as many players felt so restricted in the original Horizon because you couldn't climb everything. That's still the case in Forbidden West, and it still feels like a misstep. There's more climbable options than in the original, but their implementation feels very nebulous. Certain cliffsides can be climbed, while others cannot. Aloy is an accomplished climber, and it's disappointing when you find a wall that you can't climb, simply because the developers didn't designate it as such. It feels artificial. Still, they've expanded on the mechanics of climbing by introducing new moves, so how does that fare? Well, I'd argue not that well. You still point Aloy in the direction you want her to climb and occasionally hit X to jump gaps. However, there's alternate options now, such as using a pull caster to rip down new platforms, jumping backwards off of holds to reach areas behind you, and jumping to the side. These new mechanics make the experience more demanding of the player, but I'd argue that that wasn't really necessary. The original game's climbing felt effortless, and while that maybe wasn't the most engaging, it didn't need to be. The main allure of the game was the combat, not the climbing and exploration, so breezing through it only felt natural. There were so many times in Forbidden West where I got frustrated because I didn't know exactly what the game wanted from me to reach the next climbing hold. The variation in button inputs also threw me off at times, leading to falling and losing progress. If I'm going to be held up on a portion of the game, I want it to be a tough but fair combat encounter, not trying to get from point A to point B. This provided a lot of frustration, which really soured my opinion on the game's climbing system. Moving on, we have the highly touted swimming mechanics that were emphasized heavily in the time leading up to the game's release. Now, I didn't sit there and comb through every gameplay breakdown and trailer, but I distinctly recall swimming being a major portion of the game's marketing. And perhaps my perception was misguided, but I can't help but feel that going underwater was overhyped. For starters, the ability to hold your breath underwater indefinitely is yet another item that can only be acquired from progressing the main story. So once again, exploration is limited on this front. However, even once you get the blessed upgrade, you still can't do a whole lot underwater. You'll occasionally have to dive below for quests, but combat underwater is completely off limits. This makes sense contextually. After all, you can't fire a bow or swing a spear while submerged. However, it results in Aloy not having a whole lot to do down here. You swim, occasionally hide from machines and kelp, and try to find the exit so you can get back to questing or fighting. No portion of underwater movement felt particularly exciting or worthwhile, which makes me question why it made such dramatic appearances in the game's marketing cycle. Finally, we have flying. Very early in the game, you gain access to a glider, but outside of a few specific quests that take you to high vantage points, you won't use it a whole lot. But I used it enough to admit that it was a worthy tool in Aloy's arsenal, as every time I used it, I was glad I had it. Late in the game though, you gain access to a dedicated flying mount that allows you to soar over this game world, which is admittedly very cool. After spending the whole game traversing the land below, seeing the landmarks from this new perspective felt very thrilling. The only downside here is that it comes so late into the experience that I don't think most players will get the full mileage out of it. That's unless they save most of the side content for after completing the main story. But let's be honest, who does that? So overall, exploration in Forbidden West is once again kind of disappointing despite the attempts to spice things up. Map markers are gatekept by story-related items, the climbing felt needlessly frustrating at times, and the new traversal methods fail to make a splash. Alright, this is going to be a long section, but that's because there's a lot of content to complete here in Forbidden West. I believe every single piece of content from the original, such as main quests, errands, side quests, hunting lodges, and rebel camps return here in the sequel, save for corrupted zones. The game expands on these types of content while also introducing more on top of it, such as salvage contracts, the arena, and even a new minigame called Machine Strike. There's a lot to look at here, so let's dive in. The main questline of Horizon Forbidden West spans only 14 missions, but each of them is made up of lengthy journeys with plenty of opportunity for combat and world building through dialogue. What stands out most about these missions is their length, with each spanning about the course of an hour or so, as well as their pacing. You'll usually get the rundown of what you need to do from an NPC. Often, you can press this character for additional information if you want to hear it, or you can skip it altogether to get things moving along. From there, you'll venture out, battle machines, complete short puzzles, climb some mountainsides or ancient tech, before battling more machines of greater strength. Sometimes a companion will accompany you on the journey, which provides an outlet for Aloy to bounce dialogue off of so that the player can understand what's going on. There really isn't much else to say about these main missions, and I don't want to dive into them in terms of their story content because we'll look at that later. Really, all they do is remain similar to those of Zero Dawn while being scaled up to the next level. Side quests, on the other hand, have seen a drastic amount of improvement here in Forbidden West, as they usually introduce new characters, develop relationships with them, and provide greater context to the bigger world. Some of them even have multiple quests to complete, which, when viewed as a whole, connect to tell a greater story. The best set of side quests come in Aloy's interaction with the Desert Clan, and more specifically, its leader, Yara, and a hot-headed warrior named Draka. Throughout this set of 4 quests, Aloy will come to learn a lot about the Desert Clan, such as the ongoing strife between these two members, and the clan's struggles to locate a sufficient source of water. You'll first meet Draka at a Desert Clan outpost, and he immediately airs out his dissatisfaction with their leader because she won't provide his people with the correct rations of water despite them pulling in the same amount of machine parts. Regardless, there's a more pressing matter at hand. You must help Draka avenge some fallen soldiers by killing off some dangerous machines. In the end, you help him take down a Thunderjaw whose heart is worth a fortune to the clan. It should be more than enough to get them some extra rations from Yara. At this point, it just seems like another quest. You did your good deed, you helped this guy out, hopefully things are going to be better for him, and you move on. But no, Forbidden West takes things further. Jataka, a friend of Draka, asks Aloy for her help in Scalding Spear, and it's here where the player first meets Yara. We learn that she's a commander trying to lead in desperate times, as their water supply is running dangerously low. Old world tech provided them the sustenance they needed for years, but now the well has run dry, and it's up to Aloy and her focus to help solve the matter. It recontextualizes the conversation earlier with Draka, as we now have a better understanding of why those rations have been cut so drastically. You help Yara fix the source of water, but even so, it'll take a few days or weeks for the tank to refill, and rations to return to normal. You also discover that one of Draka's soldiers located the pump and appeared to tamper with it. Yara claims that Draka sabotaged it so that the others would question her leadership, allowing him to challenge her for rule over the clan. Draka claims that this isn't true, and that the soldier was probably doing his best to solve the issue, but didn't have the know-how to accomplish it. Tempers flare, and Draka invokes his right to challenge Yara for command. From there, Aloy meets with the two at a nearby battlefield. The player can attempt to talk each side out of it, but the efforts end up being fruitless. Bloodshed is the only answer left, and Aloy must choose a side, Yara or Draka. It's a wonderful questline because both sides have legitimate claims. The clan struggled under Yara's rule, but the water problem really wasn't her fault. And Draka comes off as innocent of any wrongdoing, but we still can't be 100% sure. It ends up being a gut call for the player. I didn't want to choose, and I sat on the menu for quite a while deciding who the leader should be. To me, that was evidence of how invested I'd become in this storyline, which is fantastic. I ended up siding with Draka and wiped out Yara, installing the former as the new leader. Later on, you'll get one final quest, which sees you helping Draka kill another Thunderjaw, but he comes off as sort of smug and arrogant, lending credence to Yara's earlier claims that he only wanted to be commander for his own benefit and ego. Draka even comments on how hard it is to please everyone in the tribe, and Aloy's quick to point out the irony of that statement. It was a super rewarding ending because Draka's ego proved that the earlier choice wasn't one between good and evil. Both sides had merit, and I simply had to choose the side that I believed in more. But every choice has consequences, and this final part of the questline proved that. And I love that. This is the most involved side quest in the game, and I would have enjoyed more like it. Force me to make tough choices after getting to know both sides of an argument. It makes for great game design, and this questline was spectacular because of it. Following this first place finisher are a bunch of silver medal companion quests where Aloy must help her 3 new friends in reaching their goals. This includes helping an Utaru woman named Zoe to restore the proper coding to her people's land gods, so that they once again function in line with the tradition of her people. Another one sees you helping a Sky Clan member, Kotalo, to build a new arm after losing his in an earlier battle. He believes the arm will grant him new strength, but he comes to learn that true power comes from within, as he vows only to use the new arm when it's absolutely necessary. And then there's Alva, a Quen diviner who seeks old world knowledge to help her people back home. Aloy helps her recover the information she needs while restoring her hope in the legends her tribe subscribes to. Each of these questlines are lengthy, spanning 1 or 2 meaty missions each, and it only feels right for Aloy to help out those who have given her so much, and it further expands our relationship with these characters and develops it further, and that's never a bad thing. Following this are a bunch of other lengthy side quests that see you helping miscellaneous people throughout the world. A handful of them are 2-parters, such as helping a lowlands chieftain named Dekka as she seeks to save her grandson, or meeting up with a familiar face in Talana who's looking for an old lover out in the Forbidden West. However, most of the remaining side quests are one-off missions, which is totally fine. Not every quest needs to be multiple parts, and it's nice to include smaller ones for the player to complete. My only gripe here is that some of these side quests did come off as a little bit long in the tooth at times. This applies mostly to these one-off side quests, as the companion quest lines and the Desert Clan quest line were broken up into chunks, and the interpersonal relationship was enough to keep you pushing forward. However, these one-off side missions can't accomplish that. For example, one side quest sees Aloy meeting a local Asaran woman who's trying to hone in on a radio transmission she's been tracking for years. Aloy aids her by traveling to 3 different areas on the map, each pretty far away from one another. Each time she reaches a tower, she must engage in a lengthy climbing section, with the last one also including a bunch of machine encounters. This takes a bit of time to complete, and that's fine, but it feels like the mission should be complete as soon as you reach the last tower. But instead, there's another step. You have to pinpoint the signal's exact location, travel to it, kill a bunch of other machines, and then find the one very specific piece of rubble that you can interact with to gain entry to the loot. And then you must take it back to the woman, talk to her again, and craft a new item to complete the side quest. It didn't work for me because Aloy mostly went about this mission on her own with very little intrigue or dialogue to keep things interesting. It felt overextended, and by the time I reached the end, I was pissed when I couldn't find that one wall structure to interact with. It frustrated me and it was needlessly long, and I feel this way about a handful of side quests throughout the game. Still, a few bad seeds couldn't spoil the harvest when it came to side questing in Forbidden West. Most of this side content blew that of Zero Dawn's clear out of the water, and that's because it did a better job of developing relationships while also building the world around you. Errands are one of the franchise's most perplexing inclusions to me. These shorter tasks are usually completed quicker than side quests, but still have a story to tell. I'm just not sure why they needed to be divided into their own category of tasks. Why not just call them side quests and be done with it? It feels like the game's trying to artificially extend how many things there are to do. These usually see you meeting a group of rather generic NPCs who don't get nearly as much development as those you encounter in main and side quests. They usually send you out into the world to recover an item, save an NPC, track a missing person, or kill a machine before returning to the quest giver to earn a reward. Overall, I was pretty neutral towards their inclusion, as I can't actively recall most of them, but I also didn't have any complaints about their pacing, storylines, or combat encounters. They provided little miniature stories that further enhanced the world, but nothing substantial enough to really get invested in. I can't complain though, as it did provide more content and value to the title. Making a return are rebel camps and outposts. One of the biggest criticisms against Zero Dawn was that combat against humans was so much more boring than that against machines. We'll talk about combat in a bit, but suffice it to say, that issue remains here in the sequel. For now, we can talk about the structure of these mission types. Outposts are smaller than camps, but each is home to a decent chunk of rebel raiders. I love that Outposts can be defeated simply by killing its leader instead of having to wipe out everyone. This circumvents the issue I just mentioned without really solving it, but it is still a welcome inclusion. There's a bunch of outposts to capture, so giving the option to wrap them up early without having to grind through all these human kills was a nice consideration. Rebel camps aren't so simple though, as you'll be asked to not only kill every soldier, but also complete a location-specific task such as blowing up a weapon arsenal or destroying shipments of blades. These alternate tasks are quite annoying at times, as the game is keen on marking a generalized location to complete them instead of telling you exactly where you need to go. It makes you feel lost as you run around aimlessly looking for where to go next. And it's not that games always need to tell you exactly where to go, but when a game like Forbidden West does it so often, it makes it frustrating because you come to rely on that, and then they take it away, and you're just lost. On their own, the camps and outposts aren't anything special, but the game does attempt to bolster their inclusion by including an accompanying storyline. As you take back camps, you'll unlock more information about the Sons of Prometheus, another group of rebels who are particularly dangerous. Defeating each camp will give you a tad more backstory about them, as well as what their current plan is. It culminates with Erend accompanying you to take them out by killing their leader Asera. The Sons of Prometheus end up feeling sort of underwhelming though, and don't provide much of a threat at all. They feel disappointing in the end after how much you hear about them and the danger they pose while you wipe out all these camps. It was a nice attempt to spice up this usually mindless game task though. With a little bit more development, it could have been something special. Still, a much better approach to rebel bases here in Forbidden West than in Zero Dawn. Cauldrons also make a return here in Forbidden West, but they now come with an added flair. Puzzle-like elements have been incorporated in between combat sections to make these feel more like dungeons rather than high-tech holes for fighting machines in. In a way, they remind me of the dungeon design in older Zelda games, like Ocarina of Time, as each of them utilizes a different gimmick. One Western cauldron includes water level manipulation, raising and lowering the water level while adjusting environmental objects for progression has always been a popular puzzle technique in games, and that remains true here. Another cauldron sees the player having to transport a new part back to the core to access the final fight, and overrides that accompany it upon victory. But it's tricky though, because Aloy's movement is severely limited while she's carrying something, which means the player will have to consider movable platforms as an alternate method of moving the part. It's hard to criticize this expansion of cauldrons, as they took an existing side activity and built on it by making them more dungeon-like. However, I'd be lying if I didn't say this sometimes added additional frustration. For example, in the cauldron where you must move the machine part, I got stuck in an area for quite a bit because I didn't see the one environmental detail that I needed to progress. This crane is holding a crate that could be grappled on and pulled to move. I didn't notice it, and it was frustrating to have to look up a walkthrough online for something that should have been made a bit more obvious. Aloy sometimes gives the player clues if they're stuck, but her silence here left me halted. Another cauldron contained a lot of climbing sections alongside of moving parts. I found myself falling a lot and having to restart because I couldn't get Aloy to follow the intended pathway. I'm not sure if I missed a climbing hold or what, but I only ended up getting past it by cheesily jumping on objects I wasn't supposed to use. And by the way, yes, cheesily is a new word that I just made up. Anyway, this particular cauldron did have an epic ending, as you repair a tall neck, ride it back to the surface, and unlock a new portion of the map. It made up for the painful climbing bits, but not by much. These moments of anguish were all too common throughout my time in cauldrons, which made me actually enjoy this set of them far less than I did those of Zero Dawn. Some people are going to love it, but it just wasn't for me when examining them as a whole. It's funny to say that though, because a similar approach has been implemented in the design of tall necks. These machine behemoths are back and are once again used as towers to unlock portions of the map. In Zero Dawn, completing these tasks usually meant climbing up to a smaller cliff or ruin and finding a ledge to jump to before finishing your ascent to the top and gathering your data reward. Here, each tall neck provides a challenge all its own. One will see you having to navigate tight above water corridors and ruins to nab the necessary parts to restore a submerged tall neck. And the most epic one will see you using harpoons to cripple the beast, granting access to its head. You'll have to work quickly and efficiently to bring it down, all while avoiding provoked machines that are hunting you. It's amazing. On the other hand, another will see you climbing through the remains of an abandoned treehouse village. Along the way, you'll have to beat Clamberjaws, a new monkey-like machine, before finding your way back onto the mobile tower. This one was admittingly the most cumbersome because one failed jump meant having to reclimb your way back up and then waiting a full 90 seconds or so for the creature to circle back around to the point that you can reach its back. I missed the jump 3 times, so there was a lot of waiting, which was annoying. Oddly enough, one tall neck is locked off until the end of the game, despite being in the very middle of the map. You reach it during a main story mission, but it's kind of a moot point by this time, as you've probably already cleared the map the old-fashioned way simply by stumbling through it. It felt sort of redundant and pointless to lock it off like this. Still, I did appreciate the game's attempts to spice up tall neck encounters. Most were still completed within 10 to 20 minutes, so they didn't overstay their welcome as much as these new cauldrons did. And then there's everything else. And oh boy, is it a lot. I'm going to go through these activities in a more rapid-fire manner, as they all mostly serve as additional content for players who want to extract extra content and playtime from the game. The biggest of these would be hunting grounds, which also return from Zero Dawn. These areas provide challenges for the player to overcome within certain time limits. I'll be honest, I didn't bother with these in the first game, and they failed to gather much interest from me here as well. I'm sure they're excellent for those who enjoyed them the first time around. Newly introduced are salvage contracts. These see Aloy picking up contracts from local armor smiths that require her to go out into the wild and hunt down the machine parts needed for crafting. This sometimes includes stripping machines of certain parts before killing them, or making sure to preserve an essential part of the beast before you take it down. The final reward for this is a legendary armor set, one of the best in the game. A harmless inclusion that adds more fetch quest content for the player base. The arena is a pretty sweet location deep into Noct territory where Aloy can test her combat proficiencies against an assortment of tough machine enemies. You're challenged to defeat every boss within a short period of time. Completing events accrues points that can be spent on some of the best weapons in the game, as well as some armor sets. These are perfect for folks who really want to push their understanding of the combat system. Melee pits see Aloy engaging in melee duels against opponents. The goal is to overcome a few set trials before facing off against the pit's leader. A ho-hum inclusion solely because you fight against human enemies, and really, who wants to do that? Relic Ruins are bite-sized puzzle dungeons where you must manipulate environmental objects to reach certain doors that contain rewards. To me, these weren't enjoyable solely because of how frustrating the climbing can be from time to time. I'm also not playing a Horizon game to solve puzzles, so it didn't do much for me. Gauntlet runs are machine races where you must outlast the competition. Complete all 4 for a legendary bow. These might be the biggest stretch inclusion in the game. There's a handful of collectibles you can also nab around the world if you're supremely dedicated. And finally, there's Machine Strike, a brand new minigame that's sort of like chess on steroids. I initially found myself interested in this mode, but it couldn't maintain my interest over time. However, there's potential for many players to love it in the same way Gwent was adored by so many in The Witcher 3. So yeah, we went through that pretty quick, but the point of it is, there's a lot of additional content for you to complete at your own leisure. I'd argue many of these components aren't as worthwhile as the ones I listed before, but including more content in your game is hardly ever a bad idea, so long as it doesn't take away from anything else. And in this case, it doesn't, which makes its inclusions very praiseworthy. A lot of content in this game, and most of it is really good. Even the stuff that didn't jive with me is going to jive with a lot of people. With all of that out of the way, we finally come to Forbidden West's most enjoyable component, the combat system. It remains excellent here and has been supplemented further with new abilities, weapons, techniques, and skills to make taking down machines even more exhilarating, demanding, and ultimately fun. So let's take a look, shall we? Keeping with the theme of bigger and better, Forbidden West allows you to equip 6 total weapons, 2 more than in the previous title. This was a wise choice, as the game introduces new weapon types for the player to consider, including discs, spike throwers, and bolt blasters. During my playthrough, I mostly used hunting bows, especially ones that came with elemental modifiers to take advantage of machine weaknesses. However, I did experiment with the spike throwers and the discs, and found each of them to be a handy inclusion. The discs have a boomerang-like effect to them, meaning they can hit the target more than once. This really helped in stacking damage, but my usage of them paled in comparison to that of the spike throwers, my new favorite weapon in the game by far. These spears have a bit of a long windup, but do some good damage, especially the explosive ones that stick to an enemy and then detonate for even more destruction. These really helped against enemies with huge health bars. Using this new weaponry alongside of returning favorites made for a pretty versatile arsenal that allowed me to feel prepared for nearly any encounter. But Guerilla took it a step farther by upgrading the skills that Aloy can unlock. The skill tree has been completely revamped, with 6 distinct trees for the players to invest points in depending on their preferred playstyle. There's dedicated skill trees for melee, ranged, and stealth builds, but a greater emphasis has been placed on overriding machines and using traps this time around, as they too get their own trees. Early on, you can invest your skill points into whatever tree you'd like to carve out your own style, but if you engage with all the side content, you'll eventually find yourself filling out every tree in the game despite the heavy point investment needed to complete just one. Still, it was nice to see an improvement over the previous game in this regard. I chose to play mostly as a melee and ranged character, meaning I invested most of my points early on into those respective trees, alongside with the sixth and final tree, Survivor. Since I rarely focused on setting up or being stealthy, I knew I needed as much health as possible to stay in long fights. So I invested in that Survivor tree to get more health benefits, and this is when I began to understand the Valor Surge system that is newly introduced in Forbidden West. As Aloy fights, a purple bar fills up in the lower right hand corner. This is your Valor meter, and it can be used to gain certain buffs that you choose by unlocking them in skill trees. Each skill tree has 2 specific Valor Surges, meaning there's a total of 12, and each of them corresponds with the tree they're found in. For example, Stealth Stalker Surge activates a cloaking device and is found in the Stealth tree. The catch with these surges though is that you can only have one equipped at a time, which kind of felt like a disservice. My problem was that I equipped the Overshield Surge for the majority of my playthrough. This granted me a shield that absorbed damage and allowed me to play a little bit more reckless, which I enjoyed. However, I had no incentive to try any of the other surges, which felt like a waste, because some of them did seem interesting when looking back in hindsight. You can change them on the fly, but I fear many players will find one they like and stick with it. And this game doesn't necessarily have a ton of replay value, so I feel like an opportunity was lost. It's not necessarily a problem, but allowing 2 or 3 to be equipped at once would have been appreciated. Of course, those aren't the only new additions to the skill tree, as weapon techniques can also be found. These can be changed on the fly after unlocking them, but consume another bar called Weapon Stamina, meaning you can't spam them in combat. These techniques mostly centered around weapons just doing more, whether it be firing more bolts at once or allowing you to carry more smoke bombs. I didn't experiment a lot with these either, as it took me quite a while to figure out how to cycle between them in the quick menu. By the time I figured out the methodology, my combat maneuvers were already set in stone, and I didn't change them much. Regardless, I'm glad they revamped the skill tree as much as they have. This one feels a lot more fleshed out, while also allowing for distinct playstyles to flourish. So yeah, your potential in combat is highly expanded, but now let's take a look at how it plays out on the battlefield. Starting with the machines, these encounters remain the most enjoyable in the game. Both returning machines and new entries have varied attack patterns and styles that make each of them feel unique in their own way. The classics like Watchers, Ravagers, Thunderjaws, Stormbirds, Bellowbacks, and Longlegs make a comeback, but what most players will enjoy is uncovering the brand new machines. In total, 23 new enemies have been added, and they feel consistent with the original designs while also providing a flair of their own. Some of my personal favorites include the Dreadwing, which is a bat-like creature that has stealth abilities similar to the Stalker, and also the Leaplasher, a kangaroo-based entity that has powerful kicks, lunges, and electrical bursts. I also love the Tremor Tusk, a massive mammoth that somehow feels even bigger than a Thunderjaw. These were a few of the highlights, but nearly every new entry feels worthwhile in some way. Except for Clamberjaws. They suck. It always feels like they had higher health than most machines of their size, and elemental damage seemed to take forever to stack up on them. I never enjoyed fighting them, it always felt like a slog. Oh, and the Slitherfangs were a tad annoying as well, since they're capable of moving very quickly. They never stay still, and their weak spots are pretty small and well guarded. They are an endurance fight more than anything else. Regardless of which machine you're up against, Aloy's focus remains a useful tool. It's best to survey an enemy before making contact. Doing so gives you insight on the best method to take it down, whether it be stripping it of heavy-hitting weapons that you can use against it, hammering weak spots for extra damage, or stacking up an affinity such as Frost or Shock to capitalize on its weakness. Following this information will allow for faster takedowns, which makes you feel more badass. With the surveying done, it's time to get in the ring. I've already talked in depth about the different approaches you can take to character building, and this is where they flourish. I found the rhythm of combat to be enjoyable for the most part, as I ran, slid, climbed, hid, and dodge rode all over the battlefield to avoid incoming attacks and keep my distance. All the while, I returned fire, trying as often as possible to connect on the enemy's weak spots to dish out extra pain. Using this very handy concentration mode makes this much easier, as the ability to slow down time allows for precision shots to connect more often. Concentration was a brilliant inclusion in the first game, and it remains the same here. Another thoughtful consideration is that you're granted much more healing items to use throughout combat. The medicinal berries return, but after progressing through the skill tree, you can hold up to 24 at a time, which is nice. You can also carry more traps, which was helpful. Not to go on a tangent, but inventory in this game is handled much better than the original. Aloy can hold more items, and anything she can't handle gets sent back to a stash that is easily accessible from nearly anywhere on the map. It was so frustrating to leave stuff behind in Zero Dawn, and that never happens here. Back to combat though, and you'll need all the healing you can get, especially against some of the tougher new enemies like Slitherfangs and Slaughterspines. Some of these bigger enemies, as well as medium-sized entries like Behemoths or Ravagers, can hit you with heavy physical attacks. This led to my one gripe with combat, that being that Aloy can get stun locked at times, leading you to eat massive damage. When a big hit connects, she sometimes stays on the ground for so long that it feels like your controller has disconnected. I don't expect her to instantly recover, but these downtimes felt too long in the tooth, and sometimes you just get stun locked and it sucked. This problem aside though, machine combat remains enjoyable, so long as you find a point of balance between offense and defense. On the other hand, we have fights against human-type enemies, and despite attempts to spice them up, they remain boring at best and frustrating at worst. Most human enemies have basic melee and ranged capabilities, while others like brutes are gifted heavy weaponry. Leaders often come equipped with shields, which can slow down the pace of combat to a halt. And many enemies can tank hits, even on the normal difficulty. The worst is when you finally manage to strip an enemy of their helmet and connect directly on a headshot, only for it to not be a one-hit kill. There's just a lot of cognitive dissonance there, since we have an innate understanding of how humans would handle taking a giant fucking arrow to the dome. You wouldn't be running around continuing to fight, you'd be dead or gravely injured. It's just stupid. I also encountered enemy types that could pick up giant boulders and throw them hundreds of feet across the battlefield, which was laughably bad. No human could do this, so why even include it? It's elements like this that are just stupid and results in these fights taking much longer than they otherwise should. Stealth remains your best option for taking down humans. It's much more efficient, but it's really just not as engaging. Once again, fights with humans feel underdeveloped and kind of poor. Regardless though, the efforts by Guerilla to take this combat system to the next level cannot be understated, as many elements of the previous title have been tweaked for the better, while also providing additional support to build diversity, weapon selection, enemy variety, and additional skills and techniques. Despite some issues, this combat system remains an improvement over the original in nearly every way. That brings us to the narrative portion of this critique, so beware, there will be spoilers ahead. The main story begins with us venturing outside of Meridian, as Aloy is searching for an answer to how to heal the planet. The destruction of Gaia in the previous game has left the world in the early stages of decay. Without an overseer, the planet has begun to see corruption in its rivers and lands with the growth of this strange red vegetation. Aloy knows the only hope is tracking down an extra copy of Gaia, finding a way to reactivate her, and thus saving the planet. Knowing that she's the only one capable of doing this, Aloy feels a tremendous amount of responsibility and pressure, but it is slightly overdone. In the early stages, she constantly comments on how she must do things alone, and that it's all on her. It's sort of heavy-handed, but it's mostly to set up how much she comes to rely on the people around her by the time the story ends. Learning to trust others is a theme of this game, but I'm not sure it's executed well enough to really feel impactful. But okay, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. After learning more about a group called Far Zenith, Aloy returns with her friend Varl to Meridian, where she meets up with some old friends and finds a signal leading her back to Silence. He's traveled to the Forbidden West alongside of Hades and may have found a solution to their problem. Aloy heads west, where she attends an embassy between the rivaled Karja and Tenakth clans. She manages to stop an attack at the embassy by a rebel group of Tenakth before heading further west and finding Silence. He's finished off Hades for good and has acquired the location of a Gaia copy. Aloy ventures down into the old facility and recovers the precious file, only to be interrupted by a group of humans, none like she's ever seen before. These mysterious humans seem extraterrestrial, as they can float, are shielded, and wield powerful weaponry. She barely escapes with her life, and is healed by a local Utaru woman named Zoe, who happens to be the girlfriend of Varl. Eventually, Aloy, Zoe, and Varl make their way inside a remote base in the Rocky Mountains, where Aloy is able to boot up Gaia and come face to face with her for the first time in a while. They discuss what to do next, and it's determined that Aloy needs to recover some of Gaia's subordinate functions in the surrounding lands to restore her to full power. This will be necessary if they want to capture the rogue function known as Hephaestus, an entity that's been giving Aloy trouble since the original game. Aloy is able to track down these three functions called Demeter, Poseidon, and Aether and return them to Gaia. Along the way, she meets new characters such as the Tenakth warlord Hakaro, a maimed chieftain named Kotalo, a Quen diviner named Alva, and these three find Showman out in the desert. And yes, I'm going through this quickly, but make no mistake, recovering these three portions of Gaia was my favorite part of the game, as each presented new characters, new locations, fascinating vistas, and a lot of world building and intrigue. I loved it. Along the way, Aloy discovers that the alien-like humans from earlier are actually members of Far Zenith, the group of space explorers mentioned at the beginning of the game. In fact, these are the very humans that managed to escape Earth before it was overrun by Ted Faro's machines. I have a lot of issues with that, but let's just push onward with the recap for now. Aloy eventually recovers a major asset in the form of Beta, a clone of Elizabeth Sobek who was created by the Zeniths. So, in a twisted way, Beta is like Aloy's sister, and is capable of doing all the things that she can since she shares her DNA. With Gaia reassembled, the group prepares to capture Hephaestus at a nearby cauldron. They plan to distract the Zeniths by splitting up, but this plan doesn't work out. Just as Gaia reabsorbs Hephaestus, the extraterrestrials crash the party. They kill Varl, they capture Beta and Gaia, and Aloy is only spared when one of their own turns against them, seemingly at random. Her name is Tilda, and she explains that while Aloy has been reassembling Gaia, Silence has been busy at work. He's been outfitting that group of Tenakth rebels from earlier with the means to overthrow Hekarro, take control of the Tenakth, and lead an attack on the Zeniths at their base. He's also found a way to kill Zeniths by breaking their shields. At the same time, she reveals the Zenith plan to reset Earth back to a blank slate so that they can build it in their own image. It's horrific for Aloy to even imagine this. She knows it's critical to save Beta and stop the Zeniths, but she also can't get on board with Tilda's plan of aiding Regalla's rebellion and letting so many Tenakth warriors perish in a battle that they aren't prepared for. She comes up with a new plan, crushes the rebellion using a new flying mount, and convinces Silence to work with her, since it's really his only option in stopping the Zeniths. From there, the group comprised of Aloy, Zoe, Erend, Silence, Beta, Kotalo, Alva, and Tilda make a push to overtake the Zeniths. At first they sneak in, but after being discovered, a massive wave of Zenith-made robots begin to ascend from their position. That's when Aloy plays her ace in the hole, as she begins to use overridden machines to do battle against the Spectres. It's a really cool scene, I'm not gonna lie, it's very metal. Literally, it's very metal. Aloy penetrates the Zenith defenses, gets revenge for Varl by killing Eric, and eventually reaches the top of the luxurious base. It's here where Tilda reappears and kills off the Zenith leader, whose name I already forgot. Okay, wait, I sat here for a minute and I remembered his name is Gerard. It's definitely Gerard. But what a super underutilized character. Anyway, Tilda just kills him, but then reveals this has been a ruse. The Zeniths only came back to Earth to escape the destruction of their new planet and to reclaim a copy of Gaia. That's because some corrupted AI got pissed at them on their own planet and wants to destroy them. Now it's capable of tracking the Zeniths across the galaxy, and it's headed for Earth to destroy it next. Tilda says that they can use Gaia to mask their new location and build a new planet, but that Aloy must come with her to make it happen, since she has the highest level of clearance. Aloy refuses, and you have to fight Tilda as the final boss. By the way, you don't get a chance to replenish your heals before this fight, at least not that I could tell, and that is really stupid. But Aloy defeats Tilda and vows to save Earth from this inevitable attack from the corrupted AI, which we learn is called Nemesis. Silence originally plans to leave Earth, but has a change of heart and decides to stay. The group begins to spread word about the arrival of Nemesis, clearly setting this franchise up for a trilogy that will culminate with the next entry. So that's it for the story recap, and before we get into it, I gotta say, I'm not sure if I should do story recaps and critiques. I feel it's necessary for people who haven't played the game, but, just let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyway, I gotta say, if you take the story here at face value, it's interesting, engaging, and enough to keep your focus. It's kind of cool how the people of the past are the futuristic ones, while the future people of Earth are the primitive ones. I didn't see them going in this direction, but it was cool, again, at face value. However, the way the story is told, alongside of some of the plot beats, are kind of whack when you take any time to think about them in more detail. When I say the way the story is told, I'm mostly referring to how quickly things occur in this game, and how influential Aloy can be, making her almost feel like a Mary Sue. For example, at one point, Beta seems hopeless, and she lacks the confidence that her and her allies can defeat the Zeniths. She's in despair about this for a long time, but after one simple conversation with Aloy, she's immediately on board, she has full faith in the plan, and is best friends with her genetic sister now. It's like a complete change of character done in the blink of an eye. The same thing is true of when you first meet back up with Erend early in the game. He seems furious at Aloy for abandoning him after the festival celebrating their victory at Meridian. And Aloy just kinda says, I did what I had to do. And he's like, yeah, you're right, I'm over it now. And I'm also willing to venture halfway across the lands with you just because you said that one line. It's stupid. Tilda abandons the people she's known for thousands of years after seeing brief visions of Aloy's accomplishments. We do eventually come to see that that was a ruse on her part, but in the moment of her initial betrayal, it just seems so far-fetched. Like, you don't buy it. You don't buy that Tilda would turn her back on all these people because she saw Aloy win the proving. Like, come on. People in this game change their whole disposition, attitude, and perspective towards Aloy and the situation on Earth and the plan without hesitation. It feels rushed a lot of the time. And sometimes I think back to older games, like Red Dead Redemption 2, that really was deliberate with its storytelling and took its time to make sure things felt natural. And the opposite is kind of true here. It just feels rushed. Also, in Zero Dawn, I never felt like Aloy was playing the role of God, but it's hard to escape that sensation in Forbidden West. It's amazing that her technological abilities and knowledge of the old world allows her to understand different situations for what they truly are, when compared to the almost religious interpretations of it from those without her capabilities. This dichotomy of views allows for interesting insights into the old world as well as the cultures of this new one. However, the result is that Aloy often feels like a stranger to this world. Her and the player walk hand in hand in this sense, and it's actually smart to establish this because by the game's conclusion, she's supposed to grow as a person by realizing she can't do things alone. However, as I mentioned earlier, the writing is just too heavy-handed. She lays it on so thick in the beginning and middle portions of the game that only she can do what needs to be done. By the time she defeats Tilda, she comes to realize she can't do this alone. Certainly not with the massive threat that Nemesis poses. It's a good arc of growth for her, but it isn't communicated well enough to feel natural. It all feels forced, which diminishes the impact of the storytelling. Thematically then, Forbidden West ends up feeling quite lacking as a result. At the same time, there's a lot of plot elements that seem sort of far-fetched, underexplained, or underutilized. Let me give you some examples. At one point, you venture down deep into Ted Farrow's hidden base to gain access to his Omega clearance. You even come to discover that the man is still alive somehow, after thousands of years, but you never see him, and he's killed off-screen in the stupidest way. Keep in mind, this is the man that guaranteed Earth's destruction when his robots went rogue with their AI and began stripping everything that was alive from the planet. He is the reason that Earth was doomed, and now he's still alive. It would be so amazing to come face to face with him, but we don't get to see him, for some stupid reason. Aloy herself obviously has a lot of emotion towards this character, but when she comes face to face with him, and her reaction is simply, "Yep, that's him." Like, what? On top of that, his immortality is so underexplained that it's laughable. And that goes for the Zeniths too. They apparently found a way to manipulate cells so that they replenish at the same pace forever, meaning they won't die. The player is asked to accept this and move on without questioning it, and it's just so bizarre. They really wanted ancient humans to still be alive in this world, which is a fascinating twist, but it's hard to swallow the reasoning for why it's allowed to happen. The same can be said about the Nemesis as well. Apparently, the Zeniths wanted to discover a way to digitize their personalities and memories and created a system where copies of themselves could be stored. Remember, these are people that are immune to old age and have shields that protect them from almost anything, yet they still wanted more on top of this. Kind of far-fetched, but maybe reasonable since they were trapped doing nothing for so long. Anyway, the copies of the Zeniths apparently gained sentience, they felt trapped, and they got angry about it. So they merged into one super entity and vowed to destroy the Zeniths and any planet that they could inhabit. It's wacky, I'm sorry, but it's goofy. I'll just say it right now, the next game has a huge responsibility to make this make sense. And if they do it like they did it here, I fear that it's not going to work out. I'm afraid that it's just going to be rushed and we're going to be thrown one generic answer and be told to accept it and move on, kind of like in this game, and that does not excite me. On another note, how the hell did Silence come up with a technology capable of penetrating the Zenith shields? It's never expanded on or explained. Again, you're just has to accept it at face value. Apparently, primitive old world tech can shut off futuristic shields with technology that the current people of Earth can't even begin to fathom. It's issues like these that make the Zenith so hard to accept, despite how cool the idea is on the surface. I really wanted to like them, but they felt so underexplained that I couldn't get on board with them, especially since personality-wise, they aren't interesting at all. Beta and Tilda are the ones we get to know the most, but they come off as boring and generic respectively. Still, that's better than Gerard, the leader of the Zeniths, who gets absolutely no development or payoff or anything throughout the entire game. It's striking to me how important a role these characters play in the overall story, since they aren't given much of a foundation to stand on. Okay, phew, well, despite my criticisms, I did still enjoy the story of Forbidden West. The main reason for that, though, is not because of the plot, but instead because of the characters we meet. Zoe, Alpha, and Kotalo each get interesting character development and growth, while returning characters like Aaron and Varl get further fleshed out simply by spending more time with them. Silence remains one of the most interesting characters in a video game to me, just because of how much his goals mirror Aloy's, but with completely different methodology. I just wish Aloy herself grew more in this game, at least in a way that felt tangible and emotionally impactful. She starts off the game capable of overcoming any challenge, and is heralded by seemingly every single person she meets, and that doesn't change by the time the credits roll. There's actually a line in the game where a character says, "Aloy can do it because Aloy can do anything," and everyone's like, "Yep, that checks out, no need to sweat it." There's very little room for growth when a character already starts as a savior. Hopefully, the final game can deliver on this front while continuing the excellent world building and avoiding some of the plot holes. Finally, we come to the presentation section of this review, and as you can probably guess by now, I don't have a whole lot of negatives to bring up, because this game is incredibly beautiful at nearly every point. The rich detail of every biome makes each of them feel grounded and visually striking, while an incredible weather system takes things to another level. Pounding rain, falling snow, and harsh desert sunlight can almost be felt physically based solely on how realistic it comes off as. The game often leaves you up on a high vista and says, well, it'd be fun to glide back down, wouldn't it? And they're right, because it results in breathtaking views where you get to see the world from new heights and perspectives. And this rich stylistic approach keeps everything feeling uniform and cohesive despite how many landscapes you'll traverse. Another component that really stood out to me was the lighting, which was absolutely next gen, some of the best I've ever seen in a game. YouTube's compression is not going to do it justice, but man, the lighting work takes this to a whole new level. All in all, one of the best looking games I've played on my PlayStation 5 in the year and a half I've had it. And the scary part is, I was playing it in 1080p with performance mode. When I turned it on to 4K presentation mode, my god, stunning. The praise doesn't end there though, as other elements have raised the bar over the predecessor. In particular, the sound work of this game is much better to me, especially when it comes to the machines. Whether it's burrowers signaling they found you with a magnetic howl, or the sound of massive machines lumbering about, everything sounds crisp and sharp. This is particularly useful when you're approaching with stealth, as your ability to track movement through sound is a key aid. Now, the music itself wasn't particularly memorable to me, but it slotted into the background nicely, adding more atmosphere to most encounters. The only track that stood out to me was Aloy's theme, which you hear quite a bit. As always, I'm not a big music aficionado, so I can't comment too much on the quality. It seems good, but that's about all I can add. The animations have also been fine-tuned and piled on, whether it be the way Aloy can now jump off of enemies after landing an attack, or the way dangerous machines flail about. It really struck me as being quite fluid most of the time, especially in combat situations. Oh, and speaking of combat, the hitboxes are unbelievably accurate as well, which was nice. Outside of combat though, some of the dialogue animations are a bit wonky. Aloy herself was very rigid in Zero Dawn, and they attempt to correct that here, but they course correct too much. Now she's sort of all over the place, constantly looking up and down and everywhere, making her feel distracted and disconnected during some conversations. It's also strange how, when you choose the optional dialogue choices, sometimes the characters will get up and move around as they talk, only to return to their original sitting or standing position so that the conversation can carry on. It feels jarring, like they're on rails or something. Back to the positives though, the load times are immaculate in this game. Fast traveling to any part of the world takes like 10 seconds at most, usually less, and the DualSense vibrations could be felt often throughout combat, which was nice. They took advantage of it, and you love to see it. The UI in this game also felt very player-friendly, as reaching any point in the menus felt quite seamless. This included taking time to explore the map, navigating the skill trees, upgrading weapons and armor, and using quick menus during combat. There's also a handful of smart accessibility options for players who need them, which is always appreciated. I only experienced a handful of minor presentational snafus while playing. Not enough to take away from the experience, but ones that are worth mentioning. I had one instance where Aloy randomly died while leaving a cauldron, which was completely unprompted. It didn't cost me progress though, it was just strange. Perhaps my most frustrating bug came in the main quest line when Kotalo randomly decided he wasn't going to move anymore. Leaving the area and coming back didn't fix it, which forced me to reload a previous save. Not a lot of lost progress due to the autosaves, but enough to frustrate for sure. Besides this though, not a lot of other issues. I mean, at one point I experienced one major lag spike during an errand involving the Utaru. I'm not sure what happened here, but closing the game and relaunching it solved this issue. And that's about it. No other big complaints. Like I said, this game is massive, huge, and bloody brilliant to view at nearly all times. I was amazed by some of the landscapes I got to traverse during my time with Forbidden West, especially with how detailed they were, how machines moved around the environment, and how much identity was packed into every major civilization. Truly an inspired take on this region of North America. As I begin writing the closing statements of this video, I can't help but wonder if I've done enough to convey the positive points about Forbidden West, but hopefully I have, because this game is outstanding. A mesmerizing and believable world has been formulated and built in an inspired manner, one that invites the player into a familiar but foreign world full of incredible possibilities. The rich attention to detail in crafting various cultures that not only stand on their own, but also interact in very human ways is admirable. The various biomes that comprise this portion of Earth are inspired takes on some of the most well-known parts of the United States. The sheer amount of content available in this game is incredible and provides dozens of hours for fans who want to get lost in this world. There's something here for everyone to enjoy, as each returning piece of content has been expanded on in new ways, while new experiences have also been introduced. The combat system remains massively engaging as well, and will see you returning to the world simply to take down each machine type just to flex your prowess as a huntress. The story, while flawed and a bit over the top, does maintain intrigue with lots of interesting characters and twists and turns along the way. And all of this takes place in a breathtaking world that rarely loses its grip on immersing you into it. Forbidden West takes everything that was great about Zero Dawn and builds on it to create an experience worth playing, while also setting up this franchise for another sequel down the road. All of this is to say that Horizon Forbidden West is an outstanding game, one that's capable of breaking through any shadows cast upon it and standing on its own in the light. Thanks for watching. Hey everyone, I know this video took a while to get done, so I appreciate your patience. As you can probably tell, I've been sick, but I really wanted to get this video done and work on it and put it out there for you guys. So what that meant was having to record while I had a cold, which is never great. I don't like to do that, but I wanted to get this project done, and I wanted to get my thoughts out there on this excellent game. So yeah, a lot of work went into this as always, so any support you can leave behind is greatly appreciated, especially subscriptions. I'm just saying, as I'm really eager to hit 1,000 subs this year. That's my goal, and I hope we can make it happen. So if you enjoyed this video, there's more like it on the channel at this point, so feel free to check it out, and please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp. And as always, guys, please have a nice day and take care.